All right, let me start with something that sounds almost silly, but it bothers people far more than they like to admit. You're sitting somewhere right now. A chair, a couch, the edge of a bed, doesn't matter. You know where you are. You can point to the wall, the ceiling, the floor. Space feels very well behaved. It has directions. It has limits, at least in the practical sense. You walk far enough, you hit something, a door, a street, eventually an ocean or a mountain or a very annoyed border guard. Now imagine you keep going, not just walking, flying. Past the clouds, past the moon, past the sun, past the stars that look like pinpricks, but turn out to be enormous blazing furnaces when you get close. You keep going past our galaxy, which already should make you uneasy because it's so big that even the word big starts to lose its meaning. You pass clusters of galaxies, rivers of them, glowing faintly like cosmic cities seen from impossibly far away. And then someone asks you a perfectly innocent question. What happens if you keep going? Most people expect one of two answers. Either you eventually hit something, some kind of cosmic wall, a brick boundary at the edge of existence, or you don't, and it just goes on forever. Both answers sound simple. Both answers turn out to be deeply unsettling if you think about them for more than a few seconds. Because if there's a wall, what's on the other side of it? And if there isn't, how does forever even work? This is where the trouble begins. Your intuition, which does a wonderful job helping you throw a ball or cross a street without dying, is suddenly completely out of its depth. It wants space to behave like a room. Rooms have walls, or like an open field. Fields go on until something stops them. But the universe seems to be playing a different game entirely, and it refuses to tell us the rules in advance. When I was younger, much younger, I used to picture the edge of the universe as something like the edge of a map. You know those old maps where the ocean just sort of stops and someone draws a monster there to distract you from the fact that nobody knows what's going on. I imagine reaching the edge, peering over, and seeing, well, something, darkness maybe, or a sign that says, end of universe, turn back. That picture is nonsense, of course, but it's a very human kind of nonsense. We're trying to force the universe to behave in a way that fits neatly inside our heads. Here's the paradox that really gets people stuck. The universe can be finite without having an edge. Now read that again slowly because it sounds like I just cheated. Finite means limited. Limited means there's only so much of it, and yet no edge, no boundary. No place where you can point and say, here. This is where existence stops, and whatever comes next is something else. How can that be if you take nothing else from this conversation? Take this discomfort seriously. That itchy feeling in your brain is important. It means your everyday intuition has reached the end of its usefulness and something more interesting is about to happen. Let me make it worse. Imagine an ant walking on the surface of a perfectly smooth ball, a sphere. The ant can walk north, south, east, west, whatever that means on a ball, but it will never encounter an edge, no cliffs, no drop-offs into ant oblivion. And yet the surface area the ant can explore is finite. There's only so much surface to walk on. Already you might feel a little betrayed by geometry. Now suppose the ant is very smart. Smart enough to invent ant physics. It measures distances. It times how long it takes to walk around. It sends signals. But the ant lives strictly on the surface. It has no concept of outside the ball. Asking what exists beyond the surface would sound to the ant like a badly formed question. Beyond where? The surface isn't sitting in something. As far as the ant can tell, it's just there. This is where people usually interrupt and say, yes, I've heard this analogy before. The universe is like the surface of a sphere. Careful. That sentence is doing more harm than good. The universe is not a giant ball floating in some bigger cosmic living room. The analogy is not about shape. It's about how your mind keeps sneaking in an extra dimension without permission. The ant's surface doesn't need an outside to exist, even though we can see one. And the universe might be the same way. Except we're the ants this time. Here's the kicker: when you ask, what exists beyond the universe? You may be committing the same mistake as the ant asking what's beyond the surface. The question feels natural. It feels unavoidable. And it may be completely meaningless. That's a dangerous idea. People don't like it when a question doesn't have an answer, not because it's hard, but because it doesn't make sense to ask. Think about time for a moment. What happened before the beginning of time? The word before assumes time is already there, ticking along, politely waiting for the universe to show up. But if time itself began with the universe, then before has nowhere to stand. It's like asking what's north of the North Pole. You can keep asking it, but the Earth doesn't owe you an answer. Now apply that same unease to space. If space itself is part of the universe, then asking what's outside the universe may be like asking what's outside space. Not empty space, not darkness, not a bigger room, just outside. Outside what exactly? And yet, and this is what keeps physicists awake at night, you can't simply wave the question away. Because our equations, those little symbols we scribble down like we know what we're doing, hint at possibilities that are even stranger. They suggest that space can curve, stretch, expand, and perhaps even connect to itself in ways that make your ant on a ball analogy look embarrassingly simple. So we're stuck in a delicious kind of trouble. The universe might be finite, but unbounded. It might be infinite, but still structured. It might not have an outside at all, but that doesn't mean it's small or simple or closed off in the way a box is closed off. The real puzzle isn't what exists beyond the universe. The real puzzle is why our brains insist there must be something there. If you want to keep going, and I promise it gets stranger, not clearer, just say the word and we'll keep walking. Good. Then let's keep walking, but a little more carefully this time, because now we're going to start tripping over our own assumptions, and that's usually where the fun is. One of the reasons this question about beyond the universe refuses to go away is that we're very attached to containers. We like things to be inside other things. A glass has water in it. A house has rooms in it. The earth sits in space. Space, therefore, our minds whisper, must be sitting in something too. It feels obvious. It feels almost childish not to believe it. So let me suggest a tiny experiment you can do without leaving your chair. Close your eyes for a second and imagine absolute emptiness. No stars, no light, no particles, no radiation, nothing. Just nothing. Already something strange has happened. You didn't imagine nothing. You imagined a black space. A big dark room with the lights turned off. But a room has size, it has distance, it has geometry. That's not nothing, that's space, politely pretending to be empty. You see how sneaky this is? Even when we try to imagine nothing, we smuggle space in through the back door. Now imagine removing space itself, not empty space. No distances, no direction, no here or there. At this point, most people's mental images just break. They either give up or quietly reintroduce space again, hoping no one will notice. That's because space isn't something we experience directly. We experience objects in space, and our brains glue the whole thing together into a seamless story. So when physics comes along and says, actually, space might be dynamic, stretchable, bendable, and maybe not even fundamental, it feels like someone tampering with the floor while we're still standing on it. Here's another way to poke at this. Take a balloon, not because balloons are magical, but because they're cheap and obedient. Draw little dots on the surface. Each dot is a galaxy. Now blow the balloon up. The dots move apart. None of them is the center. None of them is moving through the surface. The surface itself is changing. People often say, yes, the universe is expanding into something. But into what exactly? The surface of the balloon isn't expanding into a larger surface. It's just expanding. The geometry changes. The distances change. No outside required, but you protest. The balloon exists in the room. Of course it does for us. We're cheating by looking at it from a higher dimension. The galaxies on the balloon don't get to do that. As far as they're concerned, there is only the surface. Asking what the surface is expanding into is not a question their physics needs to answer. This is a recurring theme. By the way, the universe does not care what feels reasonable to a creature whose brain evolved to throw spears accurately. Let me make this even more uncomfortable. Imagine a universe with only one spatial dimension, just a line. Creatures live on the line. They can go left or right, but that's it. No up, no down. Now suppose the line is actually a circle, but so big that locally it looks straight. Those creatures could travel forever and never hit an edge, yet the total length of their universe would be finite. Now suppose those creatures ask, what's above the line? You'd say, that question doesn't belong to your universe. Not because you're cruel, but because above isn't part of the geometry they live in. It's not hidden. It's not forbidden. It's just not defined. When we ask what exists beyond the universe, we may be doing exactly that, asking for a direction that isn't part of the map. Now here's where curiosity saves us from despair, because physics doesn't just shrug and say, stop asking questions. It says, fine, let's see what happens if we take this seriously. What if space itself has a structure? What if it's not just a passive stage where the universe happens, but an active participant? What if asking about beyond is like asking what's beyond the number line, not in the sense of a bigger number, but beyond the concept itself? This is where little, simple questions start leading to enormous consequences. For example, how do you measure distance in a universe where space can stretch, If two galaxies move apart, are they moving through space, or is space growing between them? And if space grows, what tells it how to grow? You see how the original innocent question, what's beyond the universe, has quietly transformed into a much sharper one. What is space? Because once you stop treating space as a box and start treating it as a thing, all sorts of new possibilities open up. Space can curve around mass. It can ripple. It can have a history. It can begin, and beginnings are dangerous. If the universe had a beginning, not just of matter, but of space and time themselves, then, outside, and before start to look like words that no longer apply. Not because the universe is hiding something from us, but because our language is tied to experiences that simply don't extend that far. This doesn't mean we're stuck. It means we need better intuition. And the way you get better intuition in physics is not by memorizing answers, but by letting the wrong pictures break and then building new ones. So now we're standing at a strange threshold. We've loosened our grip on the idea of edges and outsides. We've seen that finite doesn't mean boxed in, and expansion doesn't require extra room. And yet, there's still a nagging feeling that something profound is being avoided, that we're circling the problem without landing on it. Good. That feeling is exactly where the interesting part begins. All right, now we have to earn our keep, because this is the point where hand-waving stops being charming and starts being suspicious. If we're going to say that space itself can bend, stretch, and maybe not even need an outside, then we should ask what that statement actually means, and how we know we're not just telling ourselves a comforting story. Here's a strange fact that doesn't get enough attention. You have never experienced space directly. Not once. What you experience are events, light hitting your eyes, pressure on your skin, clocks ticking, particles bumping into other particles. Space is the bookkeeping system we invented to keep track of where things happen relative to each other. That's not an insult to space. It's a clue. In ordinary life, this bookkeeping system works so well that we forget it's a system at all. You say two objects are 1 meter apart, and everyone nods politely. But how do you actually measure that meter? You send light from one object to the other, bounce it back, and count time. Distance, sneaky thing that it is, turns out to be time in disguise. Already, the idea that space is some rigid, absolute container is starting to look shaky. Now imagine doing this experiment on a cosmic scale. You look at distant galaxies. You measure how fast they're moving away from us. And here's the part that made everyone sit up straight. The farther away they are, the faster they recede. Not because they're all running away from us in terror, but because the space between us and them is changing. This isn't motion in the everyday sense. There's no universal wind blowing galaxies outward. It's the ruler itself, the thing we're using to measure distance, that's stretching. And once you accept that, you've crossed a one-way bridge. Space is no longer just a backdrop. It has dynamics. It obeys rules. It can evolve. Now let me tell you something that sounds like science fiction, but comes straight out of the equations. If you follow this expansion backward in time, distances shrink, galaxies get closer. Eventually, everything you can point to, matter, radiation, even the separation between points, gets squeezed into a state where our usual description of space simply stops working. People call this the beginning of the universe, but that phrase is dangerously misleading. It makes it sound like there was a moment when the universe popped into an already existing stage. Bang! Curtains open! But if space itself is part of the story, then there was no stage waiting. The stage came into existence along with the actors. This is where our intuition really rebels. We want to ask, what was it like before that? What was space doing before space existed? That's like asking what a song sounded like before time started ticking. The question uses the very thing it's trying to eliminate. Here's another unsettling truth our equations don't say, here lies a wall you cannot cross. They say, here, our description breaks. That's not the same thing. It doesn't mean nothing exists there. It means our current language, space, time, distance, may no longer apply, and physicists, being an annoyingly optimistic bunch, take that as an invitation. What if space isn't fundamental? What if it's something that emerges from deeper rules, the way temperature emerges from the motion of atoms? No single atom has a temperature. Temperature is a collective idea, real, measurable, powerful, but not fundamental. If space is like that, then asking what exists beyond the universe is like asking what's north of temperature. You're mixing levels of description. Now, here's the part that tends to make people uneasy in a more philosophical way. If space is emergent, then the universe might not be a thing sitting somewhere at all. It might be more like a network of relationships, events connected to other events, correlations, patterns. And what we call space is just the most convenient way to visualize those connections. In that picture, there is no outside. There's no place to step back and look at the whole thing from a distance. The universe isn't inside anything because inside is a spatial idea and space is part of the universe. This doesn't make the universe small. It makes it strange. Now let me push this one step further because it's where the counterintuitive truths really start piling up. Suppose the universe is infinite. Not just unbounded, but actually infinite, endless in extent. That sounds like it solves the problem, doesn't it? No edge, no outside, no awkward questions. Except it creates new ones. In an infinite universe, every possible arrangement of matter that can happen will happen, not just once, but infinitely many times. There would be regions unimaginably far away where everything is exactly as it is here, down to the last atom, except maybe your coffee is still warm. That's not poetry. That's mathematics being brutally literal. Most people don't like this idea, not because it's illogical, but because it makes the universe feel indifferent in a new and uncomfortable way. You're not special. Your location isn't privileged. Even your story might be repeated elsewhere, again and again, like a refrain in an endless song. So which is it? Finite but unbounded, infinite and repetitive. Something else entirely. The honest answer. The one physicists give each other late at night when no one is pretending to have things under control is that we don't yet know. But what we do know is that the question, what exists beyond the universe, keeps dissolving the closer we look at it. It's like trying to grab smoke. The harder you squeeze, the less there is to hold. And yet, the attempt changes you. It forces you to rethink what existence even means, because maybe the universe isn't a thing with an edge, or a center, or an outside. Maybe it's the totality of all the questions that can be meaningfully asked, and the relationships that give those questions sense. And if that's true, then the most radical idea of all isn't that there's something beyond the universe. It's that the universe might be complete, not finished, not static, not simple, but complete in the sense that it doesn't need anything else to stand against. It's not a chapter in a larger book. It's the book, which brings us inevitably to a quieter and more personal question. One that physics can't answer with equations alone, but can't avoid brushing up against either.